chains, the chains of armor that come. This is how they would have the protection. And this time they decided to take many of their wives with them. It is said up to 24 of the women of the Quraysh participated. Why was this? Because when you have the women participating, they can serve as a incentive that if we lose, we're in big trouble, right? Cheerleaders, you can say cheerleaders as well, okay? And frankly, there were types of cheerleaders, yes, in their own way, because the women would give their poetry. The women would sing out their poetry out loud, and this poetry was somewhat sensual in nature. Somewhat sensual in nature, that they are encouraging the men to basically show their manhood and discouraging them from coming back empty-handed. And so they're basically, they are in fact that type of cheerleaders. They are encouraging the men forward. But there's also, more important than this, is when you have women, you really have to fight, or else there's going to be a big problem. So they're so confident that many of the leaders took their wives with them, including Abu Sufyan, who of course took Hind bint Utbah, that famous Hind that we will talk about for many times throughout the seerah. And Abu Sufyan was the main leader of the army, and he put on the right flank, he put in charge Khalid ibn al-Walid, and on the left flank he put in charge Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl. And therefore these three people were the main leaders of Uhud. Abu Sufyan is at the head of the army, the right flank is Khalid ibn al-Walid, the left flank is Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl. Now Al-Abbas radiyallahu anhu, Al-Abbas, we mentioned that he most likely converted at the Battle of Badr, after the Battle of Badr. We mentioned that in the prisoner of war situation, when he tried to hide his money, if you remember, right? And the Prophet ﷺ said, well, you say you have no money, how about that money that you hid in such and such a place, and you told al-Fadl that in case I die, this much goes here, this much goes there. That's when he said, Ya Rasulullah, no one could have told you this other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I said back then that there is a very plausible theory, and we're never going to know facts because we can't know for sure, that he was a secret convert. And he then returned to Mecca as a secret convert. Publicly, he is not known to be a Muslim at this time. Publicly, he converts later on. But there is a theory that he converted after the Battle of Badr. He was not a convert in Badr, even though he didn't want to fight. And he said, and the Prophet said, you are telling the truth. He said, they forced me, stakrahuni, they forced me to fight. I didn't want to fight, and I didn't really participate, didn't do much in the battle. And the Prophet said, he's telling the truth. He didn't want to fight. So most likely he converted secretly, and the Prophet sent him secretly to, as a secret Muslim to Mecca, and he remained there up until almost the conquest, and then before the conquest he made the hijrah. And the point being that this incident seems to suggest that that is the case. What incident? Al-Abbas, as soon as the Quraysh left and he felt the situation was clear for him, immediately he sent a trusted servant to go to the Prophet ﷺ and inform him in explicit detail how many people, how much arms, how many horses, the entire layout of the army. Now, why did he delay until this very day? Well, one of two reasons come to mind. Firstly, perhaps the Quraysh themselves were not trusting Abbas. After all, he is an uncle, and after all, he has not shown his animosity, unlike Abu Lahab did, for example, in his lifetime, right? So he's not shown his animosity, so there's always this doubt, is he not? So perhaps they didn't inform him until the very end, or, and this is also a very plausible theory, he couldn't send anybody until the city is empty, or else there would be this clear indication. If he sends his servant, it's pretty clear. I mean, it's very dangerous for him to do that. So he waits for them to leave. As soon as they leave, he then sends a trusted servant, and this servant goes as fast as humanly possible. And that was 3 days. So the clock is ticking, because the Quraysh did it in 7. So the clock is ticking. So as fast as, and this is, you cannot get faster than this. You cannot do the journey between Mecca and Medina in those days on a camel faster than 3 days. And so he gets to Medina in 3 days, and he finds the Prophet ﷺ in Quba. He was visiting Quba at the time, and he hands the letter to him, and Ubay ibn Ka'b is there, and he tells Ubay to read the letter, because obviously the Prophet ﷺ cannot read, and Nabi al-Ummi, so he tells Ubay to read the letter. And Ubay tells him all the details, and he says to Ubay, do not tell anybody until I tell you. Don't tell anybody about this news. And he immediately rushes back to Medina, and he speaks to some of the leaders of the Ansar, in particular Sa'd ibn Rabi'ah, one of the leaders of the Ansar, telling him what's going on, because this is the first time Medina is going to be attacked. And then after this, he sends out 2 or 3 spies to check on the Quraysh before he calls a general meeting. And this is very interesting. Did he doubt his uncle Abbas? Of course not. He trusts his uncle. Yet still, this is a very big news, and it will affect everything. And you cannot operate on the presumption of maybe even a genuine mistake. What if the Quraysh have duped Abbas even? How does he know what's going on, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, first thing he does, he sends out 2 or 3 spies. to find out what's going on. And they go and they actually see the 3,000 army close by, and they come back and they basically say the Quraysh are grazing at such and such a pasture, which is basically a day or two away. Literally, they're on our outskirts now. So everything falls into place. And again, this shows us the meticulous care. The Prophet ﷺ was not an emotional reactionary. He did not just act on the whim or the spur. The Prophet ﷺ is acting very cautiously. He's thinking, he's making sure everything is appropriate, right? And he told us in many hadith, al-ajalatu min ash-shaytan. Acting in haste comes from shaytan. And at-ta'anni, or acting in predetermined thought, this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Being cautious and thinking things through, this is from Allah. And acting in haste is from shaytan. And we should learn from this that the situation is critical. I mean, they're about to face the largest army, but still, he does not panic. First thing he does, he makes sure, is it really this case? Is it really that case? No doubt some time was lost, but it is better to be sure than to cause a panic and then find out that it was a false alarm. So he finds out that indeed the Quraysh are close by, and probably, we don't have exact dates, but we can estimate or guesstimate that probably this is now by the 11th of Shawwal, basically. Our Prophet ﷺ has confirmed that the Quraysh are a day or two away, and the Quraysh basically got to the outskirts of Medina. It is said in some riwayat 12th and some riwayat 13th, they got to the outskirts of Medina. So he literally has like a window of 48 hours, give or take a little bit. He literally has a window of 2 days to do something. And therefore, he calls a large meeting of the Muslims.